Welcome everyone to the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. I'm your host as usual, Alex Beddoes. And this week we have a very special guest. You guys probably all know him as Orb, the creator of a fantastic brush pack for ZBrush. But it's Michael Vicente, Senior Environment Artist at Blizzard. Man, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Now, look, there's something that's always bugged me. I've always been just curious about before we get into like the art stuff. Orb. Where did that come from? What is that? Like, cause that's been like your online pseudonym for like quite a while now. Like, where's that from?
Well, it's a very, very stupid origin, if I may say. It's just the way I used to sign my when I used to draw as a kid. I used to sign like Michael or Vicente, and then I used to do like a circle for the eye, kind of like very inspired by Joma, the way he does the circle sometimes. And I used to do that for my eye as well. And then it started just like shifting into just the M with the circle.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually I was like just doing the circle. And then it kind of, it happened like that. I was like, what if my name was just like an orb? It's short. I like the way it sounds. And I think having a name that has like 3 letters that is very short, it's very easy to remember, it's very easy to search. I don't know, there's something appealing about having something just simple. And simple logo, simple name. I like that kind of idea. Basically.
It's certainly worked for you. It's I think everyone knows, like, for example, the brush pack. I remember my first time coming across you as the Heroes of the Storm art dump, where you had like tons of great content on there. And there's like the name Orb stuck in your brain, and like every time I speak to anybody about ZBrush, Orb comes up. And does it bother you ever the fact that people maybe know your name by Orb and they don't know your actual name? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? So a long time I only knew you as Orb.
I don't mind at all. I don't mind at all if people know me as Orb. There is even some people at Blizzard who call me by Orb, which is really rare, but that happens sometimes. And I don't mind at all. Like, for me, it's totally fine. It could be Vicente, it could be Mike, it could be Orb. It could, like, as long as people like call me something and it works, I'm totally cool with it.
Nice. So that pack, that infamous pack that every ZBrush artist I speak to, they use it. It doesn't matter if they're stylized, if they're realism, hyperrealism, character, environment, materials, like they all have that pack and they all use some element of it. I mean, what made you want to make it in the first place? Like, because I'm guessing it was before giving away free content as well, because the fact that it's free as well is a big part of it. It's way before anyone started making that. Like, a lot of people do that now as a big marketing strategy, give away free stuff and all that kind of stuff. You were doing it way before then. So like, why make the pack? Why give it away for free? I guess, did you expect any of this? Because it really is become a staple brush set in every ZBrush user's arsenal.
I think the answer is almost in the question. The fact that it's free means it's just way more easy. It's just easier to share with everybody. At least at the time, I always had a mindset of like sharing resources. Like from the start, like 10 years ago. I was in a company doing learning ZBrush basically, and we couldn't make any stylized. I couldn't achieve the stylized bevel, like beveling on my lines, and like when I was looking at a lot of World of Warcraft or Darksiders, these kind of games, they have this sort of like chunkiness and slashes. Like every time you make damage to something, even on the concept arts, they always have this kind of slashes in the details, and it's very like simplified, and I couldn't never make those very easily in ZBrush, at least at the time. I don't remember what ZBrush it was. I think it was ZBrush 3.1 or something like that. And I couldn't make those details, so I had to come up with a solution for that. And actually, the idea was super simple. All I did was a curve in 3ds Max. I basically wanted my brush to be an exact curve I had in mind. So I just made a bevel curve, and then I made a lathe from this. So my curve was the exact shape I wanted, and then I laid that curve and I mRGB Z grabbed that alpha basically, and it became like this exact curve. So technically, if you do any curve you want, you can make a brush out of it that will display, like if you want a bump and or whatever, like it will become a curve for you.
Yeah.
But they basically didn't have any sort of like very beveled brush. I guess the /3 was kind of there, but it wasn't exactly there. So that's kind of why I did these brushes. And then I just experimenting. I just experimented more stuff, and then every time I would come up with something that I use that I end up using a lot, I was like, oh, that could be a brush. And then making a brush is super easy. You take a screenshot of you just make a drawing on a sphere, you take a screenshot of that, and you can make a brush.
Yeah.
And as long as it's like useful and you start using it a lot, I think it's good to make brushes. And the reason why they're free, just sharing. Like before my Heroes Art Dump, I had a huge art dump about my previous work, which isn't on my ArtStation because I think it's a bit old now. But like maybe some people remember from like Polycount or ZBrush Central. But I had a huge art dump of like a ton of sculpts, a ton of rocks, and mostly like Inca kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And I was sharing a lot of breakdowns. Like I that's something I just love to do, is like I don't want to be like, you have to do it this way, because I'm also learning at the same time, but I love to show how I came up with the result. And this creates a lot of interaction with artists and questions, and I'm like, oh, this could be better. Like there's never like a perfect way to do it, but I think it's always super interesting to see breakdowns of works. I really recommend people to do that if they can, because I love seeing that on ArtStation when I see something super cool and I see how they did it. I see like a breakdown of it, and you just learn from it. It's super interesting. So I just wanted to do a couple of breakdowns to show that, and the brushes just came naturally as well. I was like, I don't know. I felt a bit cheap to just sell a brush pack that for me isn't that crazy. I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
couple of alphas. It's just, I mean, anybody could come up with it eventually. I don't feel like it's something especially like impossible to make, like. So they're useful, and I use them a lot, but I think I don't know, I feel more comfortable having them free.
I think there's something in there which is Stylized Art. There's a lot of nuance, like there's a lot of subtlety, and there's a lot of, you have to suggest stuff, and I think reason these brushes are great is that, yeah, you're right, they probably are simple, but there also is the simplicity is where the craft is, because a lot of people would go too far one way or not far enough. So I think it hits that sweet. It's like it's a brush set which hits that sweet spot, and it's like it's nailing stylized. Like it does. It's not overly detailed. It's very robust. Which, like I said, I've seen character artists use it. I've seen realism artists use it. So it's a very robust set of brushes. But what I want to get into is the stylized side of stuff. Now, I've been waiting for the right guest to talk about this with, and I think you're about as good as it gets when it comes to stylized environment art. I have had a lot of people I've spoken to in the past through art communities, through mentorships, through just students sending me questions, and a lot of it tends to be along the lines of, which should I do? Should I do stylized or should I do realism? And I always say the same thing. You should do what you want to make. If you want to work in stylized, do stylized. If you want to do realism. And they always say the same thing. It's, well, I'm really interested in realism, but I think stylized is easier to get a job. And I'm like, oh, you have no idea. Now, there's obviously, that's a very broad topic here, but I just want to explore a little bit the difficulties in creating stylized art, because I think there is a misconception amongst, I think it's from younger artists. I think any experienced artist in the industry at this point knows they both have their set of challenges. But for you, stylized art, what's the difficulties that you have to tackle every single time you make a new prop or you make an environment? I just want to unpack this notion of like, quote, stylized art and what that actually means.
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting question. I see that a lot as well from students. Uh, just or people just thinking stylized art is easy.
Hmm.
Uh, I think it comes down to the fundamentals as well. Like if you like stylized art is about simplification of something that is complex. So it's exactly like drawing like a character. Like you need just because it's stylized doesn't mean you don't need anatomy and proportions and all of this. And stylization is almost like the essence of those principles. So you need to know those principles. In a way, it's not a bad idea to learn 3D doing realistic stuff. I think it's totally fine. Obviously, there's a passion parameter in here because if you're passionate about something and you just want to do stylized art and that's all you care about, uh, as long as you're passionate, you're gonna do more work. So that's for sure. Like if you don't like realism, I'm not saying you should learn realism before you do stylized. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're like really passionate about stylized art and that's what's driving you as a motivation, then it's gonna be easier to just like do more art. Um, but it really boils down to like knowing the basics of what you're doing. Like you need to simplify something, and to do that, you can't just it can't just happen. You need to understand how
Yeah.
these things are made. You know, like if you do a drawing of a character and you want it stylized, then you still need to know anatomy and proportions of the face and all of this. And simplifying that is harder than just like applying exactly the rules
Mhm.
because those are the basics. So yeah,
It,
it's a very tricky question. I am
well, I guess it's kind of like you can't break the rules without knowing the rules in the first place, and I guess you
exactly.
got to be deliberate in what you do. You can't like if you just like make I don't know like these huge edge knocks. You're like, okay, well, why you do it? Like that's not really how damage works. And I know this is stylized, but you still need there's layers to damage and the way
Yeah,
damage is applied to something. Um,
I think I think another part for me that I think is super important in stylized art is readability. I think there's this notion of your something sometimes something realistic can be extremely hard to read
mhm,
and very noisy, very um, because it doesn't have this appealing uh, notion to the eye. Something can be realistic and not appealing,
mhm,
uh, and at the same time, something can be realistic and appealing as well. Like sometimes you see concrete or like some realistic stuff that doesn't have a lot of grunge, doesn't have a lot of noise, and feels better in a way, even though it's still realistic because
mhm,
there's these notions as well. But I think stylized art is really about readability. You need to make sure uh, everything reads from a distance, from rest areas, and all of this. And it's really about knowing where are the rest areas, where is the detail, and where should I put the detail.
mhm.
It's basically about like less is more. Like where it's more about like where should I remove detail than add detail.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think it's the big thing. Yeah, you see my dog walking
yeah,
behind.
cute dog.
Uh, yeah, it's really about like the readability aspect of an object. You have to make an object as readable as possible, uh, and removing a lot until it's just like that's enough to read as this object, and exaggerate proportions, obviously, stuff like that.
So there is one thing. So this is a question which still struggle with today when I'm giving feedback or critique to artists. So one of the things I think people overlook is when you're doing a stylized piece of art, and speaking purely of environments here, you have to create a language into what you're doing. So like they make, for example, a rock, and it's like okay, you've made a rock, and it's a cool rock. You're doing a really good job. Most of the time when I'm looking at environments from students or like young artists who are doing stylized, it's like this sum total, all the parts, if you look at them on their own, are pretty good. But when they put them all together, it's like, okay, this stuff doesn't really feel right because the way you
Mm-hmm.
warped the wooden railing compared to the way you warped the rock, compared to the way you've done like your floor tiling, they all feel like they belong in different worlds because they've got a different language.
Mhm.
Now, when they say, okay, well, how do I like, fix that? My answer is usually either you need concept art and reference, or you need to spend a lot of time really understanding why you've added the details in the way that you have, so that you can apply them
Exactly.
elsewhere. Is that how you tackle it?
I think you said it. I think you need to know why you're doing those things. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly like in a drawing. You need to know why you're doing uh this mountain in the foreground and this thing in the background. Like sometimes you see a beautiful drawing and you're like, um, yeah, this looks awesome, but why is it looking like this?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just understanding like composition. And in 3D, it's exactly the same. Like you can see an awesome rock, very well sculpted, but then the flow isn't working because there's no notion of rest areas and silhouette. Or so like the detail could be good, but if you don't train your brain to do better silhouettes, better compositions, then it's not gonna flow well. And the flow is a really, really other important part of stylized art. Everything needs to flow uh, just like smoothly, I would say. Like
Mm-hmm.
it needs to have a flow that looks appealing. Like if you make, especially with rocks, actually, I think that's one of the things you need this kind of like layering and understanding how a rock is made. Like why is this why are rocks like have steps and why is this rock having some sort of like directionality to it, and
Mm-hmm.
like you just can't make details that go in every direction. Like it's not how rocks are formed, or like
Mm-hmm.
just understanding why you make things um, is gonna help for sure. And sometimes people just jump straight away to like, I saw this cool rock, I just want to make something exactly like that, but they don't understand why it looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
So they're skipping a step. Um, yeah.
Is there like an element? So when it comes to like establishing design language, when you have something that you can reference, so say for example, like we said, we use a rock for example, and you've established a design language that you really really like, you've got a really cool aesthetic going. Is there a is how would you, if you were to approach this, how would you abstract that kind of language out into other assets? So like I said, you've made this amazing like aesthetic rock. Okay, now I need to make like a shield, like a metal shield, or I need to
Mhm.
make like a wooden bench. Is there like is it a case of okay, you just got to experiment and have these assets together until they kind of feel like they belong together? Is there certain like steps you take to help abstract out an idea from one piece and apply to everything else? 'Cause that's the bit I get stuck on as well. Like I get really stuck on when I was doing Stylized was trying to make multiple assets feel like they belong together. And like,
Mhm.
end up with one piece which looks very different to another piece which looks different to another piece because the materials are different.
Yeah.
That is how would you tackle that?
I think it. Okay, so obviously it depends on the style, but like um, I think it's the first thing is about the sculpt. Like I think one mistake a lot of people do is even before the texturing, their sculpt looks different. And
Okay.
one thing that I really, really love to make sure is that my edge definition is consistent across all objects. So for people who don't know edge definition, it's basically about like how big your thickness and your pixels are on screen. Like if you make a realistic weapon, your edges are gonna be really sharp,
Mhm.
and when you zoom out, those edges, because they're too sharp, they're gonna start to be aliasing, and you just see a couple of pixels. And if you have a thicker edge definition, then you zoom out your weapon, and then your line still is still smooth because you have like you have more thickness to your lines. So, and I think this is super super key on stylized art, is making sure things are not too sharp because it starts to be aliasing really fast, especially on like a game like Heroes, where when I was working on Heroes, it's a top-down game,
Yeah.
so everything is from a pretty far distance. And if you make something too sharp, you instantly start to see your edge definition break because it becomes a mess. You can't read your shapes anymore. Um, so yeah, I think making sure your edge definition is consistent. If you make a rock and the bevel, the edge of the rock is a specific smoothness, then when you make a line on your wood, it needs to feel like the same consistency in terms of smoothness, in terms of bevels. That's really key. And what was the other thing? I was thinking of another thing, but I forgot.
Welcome to my world, dude. Is literally every podcast is like I've got like these 5 things I want to talk about every time.
Yeah.
But I guess, but with that, like the consistency thing, is it a case of, okay, I want to, let's say for example, like how smooth like the edge is to a rock, to you want it to be the same across over to wood, for example. Are there instances where you should break that, where you should be like, okay, how would you, in that case, and we're speaking purely just sculpt, we're not talking about the material definition here.
Yep.
What kind of things can you look at to help break the kind of sculpting language so that the wood feels like wood and the rock feels like rock? Because otherwise, if you have like the same, I'm guessing if you have the same edge profiles on both of them, it's like, okay, like aside from wood grain, like which is an obvious one, how like is there subtle little sculpting things you do to help separate different materials from each other?
It's a tricky question, because like if we say wood, for example, everybody has their style of wood. It's like we all draw wood differently, we all make wood lines differently, and all of this, and it's hard to say that this rock looks like this wood because it's such a different type of material. I think it again boils down to the silhouette, the proportions, the detail. If the edge definition is consistent, the detail will feel consistent. But then it's really about having rules that you apply on everything, whether it's wood or rock or anything. Like if we take, for example, like World of Warcraft, they have like this chunkiness to it. So if they make like stone, that stone will feel chunky. If they make wood, that wood will feel chunky. Everything has this kind of chunkiness, like really strong bevels. And if we take Darksiders, for example, Jomad does curves and counter curves all the time. So he does like this curve and then counter curves it right away. So it gives this extremely aggressive dynamic to his drawings and on the 3D as well. Like they do that all the time. When they make a skull, it's always like curve, counter curve. It's super aggressive. And this applies to everything. When he draws wood, he makes those lines and then curves and counter curves and curves and it's a shape language that is across everything. So it's about like finding that shape language on the style you're making. If you're making like Crash Bandicoot, everything is kind of round, everything is kind of toyish on purpose and exaggerated, and nothing is too aggressive actually in their game. So it's a different type of like stylization. So once you find your shape language, you can. It's basically breaking down that shape language. What is the shape language of your art style?
Yeah.
And then how can I apply this to everything, no matter the material, basically.
I'm really glad that you've mentioned Darksiders. I'm glad actually you've described what that art style is for Darksiders. Darksiders I'm a big fan of. And I've always said it's got a really aggressive aesthetic too. I love the aesthetic. And now you've explained it, like, oh yeah, the curve, the counter curve. As you're saying it, I was like picturing some of the art station posts. I'm like, oh shit, it actually is. Yeah. So that's cool. I'm glad I know that now.
Just look at how Jomad would make like a spiral. Like instead of just doing like a round spiral that we would see on like a Fable game or something, he would make a spiral like curve, counter curve, like his runes are like super aggressive even though they're round. They always have spikes and curves and counter curves to them, and that's his art style, and that's one of the art styles that I love actually. Did super influence. I don't know, huge influence of my art itself. So yeah, that's one of the art styles. But like if you take it like a Pixar, it's completely different. Like all the faces are very round, or they try to convey emotions on their shape, obviously, and things like that. But yeah, every art style has a shape language that you need to basically recognize and just apply.
So I'm going to assume there's gonna be a lot of students listening to this. And like every time I bring on like someone who's kind of like, I quote expert in their field, like just someone who I deem is like they're an authority on this particular subject. For stylized art, for stylized environment art, if a student was to say to you like, look, I want to be in the industry, what kind of subject matter, what kind of pieces should I be looking at, what workflow should I be looking at? Because there are cliches out there. The example I always give is weapons artist, the cliche weapon, the AK. Everyone's seen a million AKs, and like although executed well and it's impressive, but still there's a fatigue factor, and the same with with environment art. Like I'm fed up of seeing sci-fi corridors. And as I was explaining this to one of my friends, it's like the reason I think people got fed up with sci-fi corridors was there is a element of it's easy to make mistakes. Like all the common mistakes, it's super easy with a sci-fi corridor. Break your silhouettes, design language, all of that sort of stuff. It's very easy to make that mistake. So with stylized art, I guess this is a two-part question. A, can you think of any like cliche environments that people should think, okay, we've seen a lot of this, maybe here's some different ideas to work around for like environment art ideas? And the second part to this question is, what are some things that if I'm saying I want to work in stylized art, what workflows or things should I be looking at in order to develop in that direction? Because there's a lot of ambiguity there with this, because most people, when they think of stylized art, it's Blizzard. And then it's like, okay, Blizzard are a very, they're a huge company. It's not like they're, it's one guy who's like, worked all these workflows out. The information's a little bit harder to get hold of. Realism is realism. Like it's the same at every single studio. You're trying to do realism. There's like a set of rules you have to abide by. So stylized art.
There's a standard that starts to come into realism, like scans and things like this.
Stylized art. Where's cliches for environments, and what should students be looking at starting out wanting to like move into this field?
Yeah, that's a good point, because there is a lot of different stylized art. I mean, even within Blizzard, if we can compare Overwatch with World of Warcraft, and it's already a different stylized art. So it's again, for me, it's really about like what the person likes. What if you're a student and you want to do stylized art, obviously there's a lot of cliches on portfolio where everybody has like a chest or like a pillar, or like like I think I've seen like 30,000 chests.
Yeah, that's true.
Or sometimes there's a very famous concept art that everybody does, which is a good idea. The problem is I don't know if you've seen that on ArtStation. Like there's a lot of like people doing the same concept art in 3D.
Yeah, I've seen it. Actually just happened to me. I was sculpted up a scene, and I saw someone do the exact scene I was looking at the concept art for. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need to find a new thing.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fine to do it, as long as you do it better. Because if you do something everybody did, you have to make it better, or it's not gonna look good on you. So it's, in my opinion, it's better to find something that isn't done a lot. Just do something that you like, that is kind of like you found a cool concept on an art book, or you found this cool piece that maybe one artist made, and you feel like you can do it better. And this is gonna have more value, in my opinion, than something that you've seen 10 times. I think in terms of like learning the art style, there's so many styles. Like even Fortnite is another like art style that's very popular.
Well, like in terms of workflows, you know what I mean? Like, because for realism, it's like, okay, the thing we tend to tell people is you need to know how to make your tilables, texture props, trim sheets. You have to be very comfortable making and using trim sheets.
Yeah.
Tilables, decals, all of these sorts of things. Modular kits. So they're like some skill sets, which you'd say to someone who's looking into realism, you should look at doing hard surface modeling as well. For stylized art, I mean, what
you should do basically.
Yeah. Where's what skills should I be making sure I have in my toolkit?
I think stylized art is, for me, I mean, personally, I always look at the sculpt once again.
Yeah.
Like I think it boils down to the sculpt again. It's I don't really mind if someone makes like an entire scene with tons of props and trees and walls, or if someone just make a small diorama. Like for me, the diorama still sells what that person wants to do.
Mhm.
I don't think it's necessary to make like a huge environment. Obviously, if you have one, that's cool. But I think what I love to see basically is just I was actually a recruiter in like other companies, so I
Mhm.
would see portfolios and I would see people applying with like I would see what they would show in their portfolio. And for honestly, like if you see a couple of props, if you see a diorama, uh, that's plenty to know what the level of that person is, because you can see if the sculpt is looking clean, if the sculpt is just like if it feels good for the stylized game you're expecting that person to work on. Um, Obviously, I think the things you said about tiling and trim sheets, all of this still applies. Like if
Mhm.
you can show that, you still need that. This is the basics for stylized art as well. You will need to know tiling, textures, and trim sheets, and and I would say like now there's like new softwares that you should probably know, like Substance Designer, Substance Painter. Like
Mhm.
I used to texture everything in Photoshop, and now I use Substance Painter for everything. I don't even think I open Photoshop anymore. Um, so yeah, there's obviously a couple of things that no matter if you do realistic or stylized are the same. You need to learn those. But I think yeah, for stylized art, it's it's hard to. It's really about you need to learn how to um, I don't know, like your objects need to feel like miniatures almost, if
Yeah.
if I may say. Like there's this weird feeling of like when I make stylized art, I almost like to think that it's like a small like Warhammer kind of miniature thing.
Mhm.
Like everything is super readable, and even when I bake, there's this thing like everybody does on stylized art where they just apply a flat color on it and then they put cavity highlights and that's it. And it's like I see that all the
Yeah.
time, and you know their highlights are like straight out from the bake. There's no like blurriness to it. There's no like it's a very sharp white line on the edges and it's like stylized. And I'm like that's just like the base of what you could do, but that you could push that so much further. Um, and if you again if you take like a Warhammer miniature for example, you would be really surprised at all the tricks they do when they paint their figurines. Like the way they highlight things are it's not just a white line. It's really about it's almost like a 3D height map on your object that pushes every single shape. You know, like instead of having a thin line on all the edges, that line just like has a fade, has a gradient, and it just highlights every shape. And that's how I like to think about texturing when I do stylized art. I always like duplicate my highlights a couple times and blur them with different blurs
Mm.
until they have this kind of like smoothness to it.
It's funny because I'm actually pushing because I know what you mean by the whole flat color thing. The example, like the sort of comparison I give is the flat color with cavity is the same as if you just slapped bronze armor or substance painter on a realistic prop. It's like
Exactly.
you've
Yep.
you've kind of missed the point here. The thing I look at with Stylized Art recently, which has been really grabbing me, and it might be Ubisoft recently released a game. I forget.
Phoenix
Phoenix.
Immortal.
Yeah, I'm looking at
Yep.
all their materials,
I
and they
love
kind
the
of
the, the
they
work.
remind me of Ghibli movies. I was recently looking at the Ghibli, and I'm like, there's
Hmm.
a lot of information in like a brick. A brick is not just a flat color. There's like all this
Yep.
tiny subtle information, and it's great because one of the artists has been posting like GIF breakdowns of just their albedo, and I'm like, there it
Yep.
is. That's what I show students now. I'm like, look, here's the flat color that you did. Okay, here's 20 steps this artist has gone to make the final albedo. Look how much information has gone into this.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Like it's exactly what I was saying about like when you hear stylized art, especially on Substance Designer, for example, because that game had a lot of Substance Designer texture works, and they did an amazing job on that game. By the
Mm,
way, I really loved the result they came up. But when you when you think about like stylized Substance Designer, you always see a lot of stuff that is very like flat cavity and that's it.
mm,
And Phoenix Immortal actually shows you that you could do so much more than just like highlights. You know, like
yeah.
it's really about implied detail. It's
Mhm.
it's not about you don't need to see the all the cracks and all the things. You just need to squint your eyes and understand what this thing is, and just have the impression of detail. And Ghibli does that all the time. Like you look it from the distance and all the trees are simplified. It's like
Mhm.
they start to like fade into just flat shades of green, and then when they zoom in an object, like in Ariety, for example, like when they zoom in something, then they put a ton of detail because they have, but it's still like painterly. But then they're like,
Yeah.
you're in close up, so now this is how the thing is in reality. But when we pull the camera, we simplify all of this. It's almost like an LOD, like a
Yeah.
mip map, almost like a mip mapping, like.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like you can do a lot in stylized art, and yeah, I think Immortal did super. They did an awesome job on their game. I really, really like all their textures, and they have a very Ghibli feel. That's true.
Yeah, it's just a matter of I mean, it came from because I'm spending more time looking at albedos as I'm making more materials and I'm working on environments more. It used to be it was all about the height map and the normal map, and that's where I put all my attention to. And then like I thought, okay, I'm now enlightened. It's all about the roughness map. Okay, it's all about the roughness
Mhm.
map. And now I'm like, now I'm starting to see just how much work you can put into an albedo. On both
Yeah.
stylized and realism, it's like, oh, that's what sets the good materials aside from the amazing ones. So I was looking at I was dissecting some of Ben Wilson's graphs for realism because he has
Mhm.
an amazing aesthetic for his stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
how does he do it? They're simple shapes, but they look amazing. And then I look at his albedo, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm seeing it, and it's great because when I saw the Phoenix Mall Rising stuff, I was like, it's the exact same. I was seeing just amazing albedos, and that's what sets them aside from all the other
Mhm.
stylized materials I've seen up to this point.
And
It was the
even their
albedo.
roughness, is really
Yeah.
interesting. Like some people, like especially students, like sometimes they don't give a shit about the roughness. Sorry, I don't know if I can if I can
Oh,
swear.
you're good to swear.
So
I swear a lot on this
you'll
podcast.
you'll blip. That's fine. Yeah, they don't really care about the roughness at all. Like sometimes they just convert their albedo and they call it a day. Like they're like, that's my roughness, and I invert it. um, but yeah, even on Immortals, that their roughness has like a very brushstroke feel,
Mm-hmm.
and when you look at the light, the way the light reacts, you see those like flaking, like in the
Yeah.
roughness, and it's super interesting because even though it's technically kind of PBR, because they bake lighting in their albedo, so
Yeah.
it's not exactly PBR, but it's kind of PBR. But their roughness has that stylization as well, and I think that's yeah. Even their normals as well. Actually, their normal also has like flaking and
Mm-hmm.
and effects on it that gives a brushstroke when you move an object. You see the normal almost creating brushstrokes on the shading, which is another thing that is like pushing that style.
And you know what? It's actually a testament because you think about like, okay, look how much detail is in the albedo, and then I'm gonna have like sort of what's the word? Contrasting roughness. It's not just a roughness that mimics the albedo; like it actually has different lines and shapes going on. And like you said, the normal is also different. And it's like if you it's to say that to somebody, you say, oh, that's gonna come out really noisy and like just a garbled mess. But like when you see it all together,
Yeah.
it's really nice. And again, it comes back to what I said we were talking about at the beginning. They show a load of materials next to each other, consistent quality, consistent
Yeah.
style. It is so impressive. When I saw that
Yeah.
art drop and I saw all of their materials, I was like, holy shit, they've actually managed to like it was great. It was a real pleasure to look through. Not many
Hmm.
art drops grab me. Like I don't get interested in art drops too much. The past two which have really grabbed me, it's funny enough even though I do realism, has been Darksiders and that title, the Immortals title. Just
Hmm.
because it is different. Like I said, it's a slightly Ghibli-esque style albedo stuff. Darksiders had an art style which I hadn't seen before, like at scale. It's a real breath of fresh air.
Especially for designer, I think it's like
Yes.
refreshing to see that much like stylization done in designer,
Yeah.
because that's kind of like a misconception where at least it was for a while, where stylized art was kind of not great in designer. But this proves it wrong. Like you can do like pretty amazing stylized work in designer,
Mm-hmm.
and they did it. Like they really show how you can do it. They have really talented designer guys there. There's like DeRosier.
Yeah, he's amazing. Well, he's just left.
Yeah, I know.
It's a shame, man. I'm really sad to see that. Vincent's amazing. He's
he's a master at designer.
Well, the thing is, designer's a weird beast because it's become its own like almost art form, and it's weird because like every time anything negative comes upon designer for some reason on social media, people love to like shit on designer. I don't know why. Environmental artists seem to dislike it to some degree, but it has gone through a maturing process. Like at the beginning, all you saw were tiles, like bathroom tiles.
Yeah,
all that anyone did, and now we're starting to see, like I said, we can do stylized. Okay, that's changed the ball game completely. How far can we go with this? Leveraging photo scans, like Ben with what he's been doing, he's been leveraging photo scans a bunch for his materials. Okay, 100% design is kind of this ridiculous idea now. Like I used to abide by it, and I regret it deeply. But it's like, okay, photo scans. Like how can I push my materials now? And it's the same with stylized. It's this weird own art form that's kind of grown, and people are like pushing the boundaries. There's a guy, and I feel terrible because I forget his name. I think it's Andre or something along them lines. He's basically like a technical substance designer guy making like procedural patterns and all these kind of things using the back end math of designer. And it's really amazing what he's making. Like I was seeing it and I'm going, I mean, he's not making materials as such. He's making patterns, animate and do things. And I'm like,
okay.
Okay.
I know that. Yeah. I know.
You know the
what
guy.
you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, wow, that's a really unique way to use designer. Because it wasn't like he did one material; he's done like lots of patterns, and I'm like, this is a completely new avenue for substance designer. Okay,
yeah, he did these roots kind of growing. And the liquid flowing a bit, like
that's the one. And I see that.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
I saw that.
Another
Yeah,
avenue for it.
Yeah.
Now,
I was gonna say something as well. What was it again? Shit, I lost track again. You were talking about something, and then I was gonna jump on it, but then I forgot. Of course, it's the stress of the being recorded, I guess. Damn it!
What were we talking about? Was it about designer?
About designer, yes. We were talking about the textures from designer. DeRosier. Damn. That's fine. Maybe it will come back.
Well, I mean, so it's funny because with designer, like I kind of have this relationship now with it where it's like I'll use it when I need it. It's almost like a breath of fresh air for me to go like use ZBrush for materials. Now I said to a lot. I always say this like I
remember.
Go.
Okay, before I forget. I think there's also this like misconception that I see a lot where everything needs to be like 100% designer, or like 100% ZBrush, or like ZBrush versus designer. Like I think like people should really care about like the output. Like the only thing that matters is the output. As long as your thing looks good and then your process works and it's not something that takes too long, and you can do iterations on it, like you really just care about the output in the game. Like there's this stigma of like your texture needs to be 100% designer, and that's not true. Like you can use ZBrush to import alphas in designer. You can do a hybrid process. Like there's this like pride, in our station where everybody needs to put like 100% procedural. Like
I was guilty of it. I did it for like when I was first learning designer. Every single post I did 100% designer, and the tipping point for it was I was speaking to Ben. I was having like a session with Ben Wilson. I was like getting some advice off him, and I had one material. I did a material where I used Marvelous Designer to generate like fabric, and I put it in there. And I was asking him, I was like, dude, do you think I should delete this because it's not 100% designer? So like, it's kind of cheating? And he laughed. He was like, dude, if anything, I think it shows your understanding of designer that you know when you need to step out of it and you need to leverage another piece of software. It's like, who cares? It's a good material at the end of the day. Like, that's all I care about. And
I was actually sorry. So
the issue became, and then he was talking about photo scans, and he went, you could make every single leaf in designer, 100% designer, and that is a huge graph that took you 2 weeks to make.
Takes a lot of time.
Or just grab a photo scan or a ZBrush sculpt, which takes what?
Yeah.
A couple of hours. Like it's like I said, it's the output versus time that's the important thing, not the tools used.
There needs to be a reason to why you would spend time on a leaf. If the reason is because there is a lot of stuff that's gonna use leaves, and there is a huge reason for that, and the game is about leaves or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, like then it makes total sense to spend the time, and then because it's basically how much time do I spend versus how much time I will gain behind. If you don't think you'll gain time behind, then don't spend the time. In my opinion, like I don't think it's that important. And I was talking with DeRosie actually about like designer and like tricks and stuff he was using, and he came up with the same realization as well, where like we came up with the same thought, I guess, where it's basically about like best of both worlds, you know, like if you're really good at ZBrush, use ZBrush. If you're really good at designer, use designer. If you're really good at texturing with designer and really good at sculpting in ZBrush, just do both. Like he has a couple of examples of that actually in his ArtStation as well, where he just sculpts a tile and then he just applies this designer texture on it. So
which actually works amazingly because he uses the scattering of designer. He has this beautiful sculpt and he adds moss to it. It's like, you're using designer for what it's meant for, scattering, and he does it really, really well.
Totally. So yeah, I think there's no like that's the way, that's the program. It's just about like how are you comfortable in like designer or ZBrush, and just use the things that you're the most comfortable with. And then if you think that designer is really interesting and really powerful, then learn it and try to incorporate to your workflow. But do it for a reason. Like use it for the reason you want it. You know.
Well, it's unfortunately that the kind of tribalism, not like mentality that you have with modeling packages to use Max or Maya or Blender.
Yeah.
And like that kind of like that is my team versus your team. It's unfortunately crept into like the material space too, where it's like, well, do you use ZBrush or do you use designer? And then or like, do you use, I don't know, like Mixer? And it's like, why not all of, like I say, all of them. Like Vincent's a perfect example of it. It's like, you know, look what I've seen some great material artists who use only ZBrush, and I see some great material artists who use only designer. And I see what Vince is producing in very quick. He's doing it very quickly. Like, you know, it's not like he's spending years on it. And he's got some of the nicest materials using ZBrush and designer. It's like, hey, what do you know? Using all these tools is actually a benefit.
And also the fact that if you look at the sculpt of his like riverbed or the one with the statues on it, like the sculpt isn't like he didn't push the sculpt. He just did it like good enough that it's like, okay, that's good to go. And then designer does all the heavy lifting behind. So it's a super smart and quick process. Like you don't need to like spend a crazy amount of time. Like you don't need to think that you need the crazy sculpt and then do the crazy designer. It's about like the strength of each. Like this ZBrush is good enough to do this, and then I'm better in designer or whatever, and this is gonna do the heavy lifting, and you just like balance the software that you're the most comfortable with, basically.
But then there's also the fact that, you know, we are making games and games have time budgets, and it's like it's like I saw one with a brick wall like example, and it's like, okay, yes, you're right. It took me like quite a while to put this brick wall together in designer with all these like functionality for breaking it and all that sort of stuff. However, I can now generate like 15 variations. It's like there's power there. You can't overlook that. You can't discount that kind of utility. It's just very interesting. Every time, like I tweeted a while ago, like it was a meme of the guy from Tangled, like a load of knives to his throat. And like, say something that will make the art community react like this. And I said, no one gives a fuck about your 100% designables. 100% true. But a lot of people were like, yeah, fuck you fucking design. I'm so fed up. And I'm like, whoa, I'm joking. Like, I'm taking a piss. I'm being, facetious. Like, designer's fucking good. Like, you can't, you know, it's a really good tool. Like, it's like, it still has some growing to do. And it has some weird, like, quirks within the community. Like I said, material balls on your portfolio. I'm guilty of it. I have a load of them. It's like, Yeah, they're not gonna.
Sphere artists.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I'm guilty of it. I have a load of them on there, but I don't know. But there's a negative connotation with it, which is quite interesting right now. Now, I just want to circle back to ZBrush for a moment. You spoke quite a lot about designer, and you're a guy who I imagine spends, well, like I said, you spend a load of time in ZBrush.
It's my main for sure.
So, I every time I speak to materials artists, I always talk to them like, design, because it's a new software. I was like, what would you like to see from designer? What features? Because they're constantly updating, they're changing. ZBrush is a bit slower with updates, with coming out with stuff. I mean, in fairness to them, when they do, there's normally really good shit. Yep. What stuff do you still look? I mean, you're using it more than anyone. Like, what stuff do you want to see from ZBrush? What features would you like to see that would make your workflows easier or anything like that? Like, have you got any ideas for that sort of stuff?
I think they need more tools for environment art. I think they focus too much on character.
Okay.
In my opinion, there's way too many tools for character, not enough for environment. Like one example, for example, is that when you try to do a tile in ZBrush, you can use the wrap mode. But the wrap mode needs to be applied on every single brush, which is super annoying.
Yeah.
They need like a button that just says like all wrap mode.
Yeah, yeah.
And all your brushes turn into wrap mode. Because you forget to put wrap mode on your inflate and then you screw your tile.
Yeah.
So super annoying. That's one detail, and this has been there forever. And just just more tools in general to make environment art. One brush that I really wish they could do is like a silhouette brush, where I don't know if you know Pure. He's an environment. He's a character artist that used to work here. Super good artist, but we used to talk about this. Like, it would be awesome to have a brush where you just like just make a shape, and then it automatically removes that shape, and then almost like if you do a selection with Dynamesh, and then you delete hidden, and then you Dynamesh, but all of this in one step.
Can you use clip curve?
It's not, well, if you do clip curve and you go into like negatives inside the shape, it doesn't work anymore. More like a voxel type of
right.
removal. And also the other problem with this, if you do that in Dynamesh, is that the Dynamesh has an algorithm where they smooth the deleted parts. Like, it's not based on camera. Basically a camera brush where you just delete things based on camera.
Right.
So in Dynamesh, it removes with an algorithm that averages the part that was deleted. So it's not exactly that either. That would be awesome in ZBrush. I don't know why they're not doing something like this. Actually, in the last update, I think they did something similar. They have this balloon brush that kind of has that idea. I think they have something maybe similar. I don't have the last ZBrush at work, but
do you ever look at Blender? Just out of curiosity, like I've seen some very good artists sort of. They use Blender like for sculpting, and it's still nowhere near as good as ZBrush, but it has made some major steps. Have you dabbled with it? Played with it?
I played with it a bit, yeah. I don't like it. In my opinion, it's kind of like Mudbox ZBrush. I think ZBrush just went so far in terms of just the feel of it. Just feels fast and responsive, and I'm just so used to ZBrush and doing exactly what I want in ZBrush fast, that it's really hard for me to just go into Blender and experiment with it or Mudbox. It just
I haven't used
while.
Mudbox before.
I think Mudbox is pretty much dead. In my opinion, Mudbox. I mean,
I would be surprised.
Who uses Mudbox anymore?
I think there's. I've made this point before. I think there's one artist somewhere, like a hard surface guy, who still uses it. I've had this exact conversation where I'm like, it's dead. Who the hell uses it? And they're like, no.
Let's be honest. Dude. I don't want to be mean to Autodesk and Mudbox. I just don't think people use it anymore. I don't. At least around the people I know, around me, the artists I know, nobody uses it. Like, and in every company where they sculpt, I don't see them using Mudbox. I think ZBrush just took the leap, and they just they went pretty far. They're pretty strong.
Well,
right now.
That's why I'm like, I agree. I'm for sculpting, ZBrush is definitely still like light years ahead, but it's been quite nice having Blender there. It's done the same for modeling packages like Autodesk with 3ds Max, but it's like them doing stuff has kind of nudged the big companies, because ZBrush have been up there on their own for the longest time. Like nothing's come close to them. And it's been nice. Like Blender came out with them cloth modified brushes, and
totally.
And it's like, oh, ZBrush do it. And I'm like, okay, you know what? If this is what it means, fine, I'll have it. I'm more than happy to stay with ZBrush and they just have Blender chasing them, just like poking them to, hey, do something. Look, we've done this. What are you doing?
Competition is good. Yeah. Competition is great. Like we need, I mean, it's kind of a bummer if Mudbox is dead, if they are, because we need competition we need it to improve softwares. Like they need to have someone. This is why Wacom has so much monopoly over like tablets, for example, that they don't really care if their driver sucks and if they're, like if they have problems with their tablets, whatever, we have the monopoly, So that's why having competition is really good, because they have to be better than the other. But I think it's really good though for Blender that they're trying to be an all package. Like it's awesome to be able to go from poly modeling to like sculpting and UVs and doing everything animation. Like someone who is not like someone who's trying to do an indie game or something, or learning 3D, he can like touch everything on one software without having to learn like 50,000 softwares. So that's great.
Yeah, competitions it definitely is good, because it's like, I think we've seen it with like 3ds Max. It came up with the Smart Extrude feature, which is like an evolution of something that Blender has, but it's done better. And I'm like, good. This is a good thing. Like, although I'm using Blender at the moment, I used to be a Max guy, and I'm like, they didn't move for years. Like they barely made any modifications. And then I saw this feature, and I was like, it was the first time in years I was like, oh, maybe I need to open Max again and have a little play with that. And it's like. It's actually, funny enough, one of the concerns, I say concerns, Unreal Engine at this point, like, they have Fortnite money, they're just going to keep innovating and doing shit. But I'm always like, when it was Unity versus Unreal Engine, they were pushing each other, I feel like, to do things. Now it's just Unreal Engine, and they're up there on their own. There's no free engine available, which comes close to what they're doing. It's like, are we going to end up with an Autodesk situation, or even a ZBrush situation, where it's like, okay, now they slow down. We have no reason to innovate. We have no reason to be better, because we're the only guys out there. This is a concern that's come to mind.
We could say that, but then when we look at like what they did with Unreal 5, and when we see that they're now using Unreal in like big productions like Mandalorian and like TV shows and things like this, they are touching other
fields.
The name. Yeah, they are touching other things than video games, like movies and things like this. So they are branching out. That's what I was looking for. So I think the fact that they're branching out also forces them, or in a way makes them work on other things that can also work for the video game and vice versa. So I mean, everything they're showing is amazing. Like it doesn't feel like they're slowing down. And I think for Unity, we could totally see that they were inspired by like how good Unreal looked, and when they started to integrate the HDRP and URP, trying to get a bit more of a PBR vibe to their engine. Like, hey, we can also make like AAA. But I think there's still gonna be people choosing them. Like they have such a different workflow. I actually worked on Unity, and it's such a different way of working.
Yeah, it is.
Like the problem with Unreal Engine is that you have everything you can
load it.
You have everything. All the tools are there, but sometimes you just want sometimes you just want the wrench. Yeah, you don't want all of these other tools that are cluttering. And Unity is the opposite. It's like you might not have a lot of tools, but you can make them on the spot. You can make your wrench, and then you have it, and then it's clean. Like sometimes Unreal is like really packed with a lot of stuff that you don't need, and that like impacts optimization and all of this. And
it's very heavy, clunky.
Yeah,
it is very true. We have seen that like on productions. I've been on a few productions with it now, and I'm like, it's cool that it can do all this stuff, but it almost gets in the way of being able to do other more niche things.
Yeah, like if you would make your own engine, sometimes you would have so much more performance, because you would make your engine for the game you want to make, and then using Unreal, sometimes it's a lot of optimization has to happen because they have a lot of stuff that you don't need in that game you're making.
Man, it's get me thinking. I'm like, oh god, a proprietary engines. It's been a long time since I've used an in-house engine, and it was hell. I'm not gonna lie, it was hell. However, it did run smooth as silk.
It's hard, yeah. I had one
really
on
difficult.
Titan. When I joined Titan before Overwatch, we have a proprietary engine, and it's rough because every time you need something that's not there, you have to wait.
Yeah.
So, hey, can we have this shader? Well, we can, but it's not.
You've
there
been waiting
yet.
a few weeks.
Yep.
Well, dude, I mean, we've been going for an hour already. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Like, you've really helped clear up some mysteries. It's, I think this is something that has been needed for a while. Is sit down with a really experienced stylized artist and just give the same sort of information to students that we've been giving to on realism or on materials or anything else. And it's been fun to talk about material art. It's been a while since I've spoken about material art, really. So, I mean, I appreciate taking the time out of your day. I know, this is your lunchtime.
Going back to work in 15 minutes. Really
Mate, I'm sorry. I've eaten up your lunch break.
Oh, no, that's all good.
Everyone, and everyone listening, remember, do the usual like, follow, share, subscribe. The more the podcast gets shared, the more that people get to benefit from the knowledge. Yeah, hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit what's the one? The notification about
the bell and
everyone just do that. Like I said, it helps get the message out there so that more people can learn from fantastic artists like Michael here. But dude, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was cool.
Peace out, guys.